What's up, guys? Moser with Negron Tech. I wanted to bring a little bit of different video. A lot of people are doing tier lists, but I'm going to do a little bit different. This is going to be the early game class tier list. Now, people might have done this. Most people do a general tier list, class overview of the total rankings. But a lot of the game, maybe even like 40 to 50 hours, you're going to be spending under level 8. Acts 1 to 2. You're not going to be a super high level. These early levels really are the majority of the game. And even though Act 3 is long, you will be maxed out early Act 3, maybe even super late Act 2, depending on how much you min-max your experience gain. You'll still spend a good amount of time at max level, which is why most of the builds that I do revolve around that. But I wanted to do more of a tier list class overview for the early game, so you kind of know, like, hey, levels 1 to 5, Act 1, and then Act 2, what are my options, really? So I'm going to talk about that here, and then I'm just going to go in alphabetical order, right? So the first class to talk about is going to be the Barbarian, my personal early game class. This is Guts Black Swordsman arc. This is the Apostle Hunter. Absolutely unhinged. This is in the SSS plus tier. Absolute Giga Chad. Why? It's the only class where you get 3 attacks early game. You hit level 5, you get 3 attacks. I don't want to talk about monk yet because, the early game monk damage is not as good as Barbarian. Not only do you get rage, but the damage reduction is extremely valuable early in the game when people are hitting for lower numbers. It's the same reason why Heavy Armor Master is much more viable in the early game, right? So Barbarian, you get free AC from Khan. Very, very good. So for the Bull's Cloth, I think it is in Act 2, you get a chest piece. That does increase your strength up to 18 or 20, I don't know, but that really enables you to increase the damage output by a lot. You get the biggest hit die per level. As you level up, so you're going to have the most hit points. You get flat damage from rage, flat damage reduction from rage. You get immunity to charm and other things when you do get a high enough level. But once you're level 5, you get 3 attacks per turn. Now, you do have to use reckless attack, but here's the thing. Guys, free advantage. This is the only melee Giga Chad. This is the Guts build early in the game that you can offset Great Weapon Master. Because now you're hitting those plus 10s on Great Weapon Master so much more efficiently. Nothing really compares to this in the early game. This does not really get compared to until at least level 8, and that's if you're going to abuse a Warlock, Paladin dip or something. Or no, not even level 8. You got to hit level 10 because you got to hit level 5 for Warlock and whatever Martial class if you're going to do that hybrid version, right? So you have to, nothing else compares to this early game, guys, really. Monk is good early, but it's just not as good as Barbarian in my opinion. Next up is Bard, and this is a hard class to really quantify, right? Because everything about it just screams, but it also is kind of okay, right? So I'm going to be nice. I don't think any class is inherently bad, especially even the Tactician difficulty. It's not a big deal, guys. Like, you can literally play, you could play, like, I think, I'll spoiler, Druid is the worst one. You could do 4 Druids and you'll be fine, like, unironically. But anyway, going back to Bard, I think it's okay. This really shines as the 4th party member, a complementary piece to your party that doesn't really need to bring anything super overbearing or overpowering to the party. But the additional short rest, the plethora of CC options, small healing. It can do damage, really, when you get to level 6 with their extra attack and College of Swords, and provide utility with the flourishes and be somewhat of a melee frontliner tank. But the thing about the Bard is you have a lot of options. So I do give it kudos for that, and one thing that's going to be consistent with my early game class rankings, most of the caster classes are going to be weak, right? You don't have enough spell slot levels. Sorcerer doesn't really pop off yet. The Paladin Smites combination with other class tips are not that good yet without abusing the limited powers. So really, it's, back to Bard, it's okay. But, it is a caster. You have the option to, be utility. But this really shines as that complementary. Oh, you know what? I love Gale, but I don't want a Wizard or Sorc early games. They're a little bit too weak. I'll make him a Bard and bring the utility, the healing, the CC. The overall support, it's also an incredible skill monkey class, really benefits from being that MC character, the frontline world character that you talk to and interact with everything because you get all those proficiencies. Very, very solid okay class. Really, really borderline meh, but I'll bump it up to okay just because, it's all right. It's all right. It's an okay class. Alright, next up is the Cleric. I am giving this, the Poggies, the Poggers, this is high A tier. Maybe even, low S. Not a Giga Chad, not a Giga Shadowheart Chad, but I think this is an incredible class, and I think if I was doing a full tier list, not early game only, this would be S tier easily. It's such a solid class. It is the ultimate support character. And the thing about Cleric is that it just has so much utility. You could turn the Cleric into a high level, powerful offensive caster. It can be literally like the Giga Stacy healer. Like, it can do so much. It brings a plethora of powerful offensive buffs for your party. Also brings a huge amount of negative buffs to the enemies. It has damaging options. It has, decent cantrips. It has the option to wear heavy armor. You can really, truly be a melee frontline caster. Like, if you think more about a Paladin that's more of a support class that goes into melee with a sword, like sword and shield, one-handed weapon and shield, and is going on there, engage enemies melee, other casters locking them down while they're being tanky, and being able to concentrate and cast and melee without having much of an issue, it's the Cleric. The subdomains, Tempest, Life, Light are incredible. Light domain specifically, I did my Mage Knight, my Gith video. They actually have something just as good as Blur, where they can actually create disadvantage on attacks to them, and that reaction does not use a spell slot. It is secretly, some people do talk about it in the builds, but it really is one of the most incredible, probably the best defensive mechanic in the game. I don't think it's been patched or addressed at all, but it really is just so damn good. But, just the final thoughts, it really is the same way I said the Bard is a great complementary piece. The Cleric is, to me, it's the absolute must-bring complementary piece to a party. Right, the Tempest gives you knockback utility. You use other people to create water, and then you increase your damage twice-fold. And this is the thing in the early game, like the Tempest Cleric is so damn good. Life, Light, Trickery, not so good early, but War Domain, these domains are just damn good. War Priest Chargers are very good in the early game because a lot of the plot points actually need you to long rest. Long resting and short resting by default is not a huge factor in the game. You have even on Tactician, you do get an abundance of resources, and you can always abuse, doing a long rest without resources and half resting, right? So there's just so many good things. I think the Cleric early game, like, again, you probably saw my Shadowheart video, it's an absolute must. I never got rid of her up to Act 2, not only for the lore reasons in the early acts, but also just because the incredible amount of utility that she brings, and the Cleric class in general. Next up is the Druid. This is very regrettably going to be placed in the D. Like, come on. It's just, the thing about the Druid early game is that, and you could say this for the rest of the game too, it just doesn't do enough for the party, right? The shapeshifters, the shapeshifting is okay. As a pure caster support class, is not as good as the Cleric as an offensive classer with the CC, the options that it brings. I completely forgot the biggest thing about the Cleric, excuse me. Early acts. This is the Undead God, this and the Paladin. These things their rating is like, this is why it can almost be S tier, because their proficiency in dealing with undead is so incredible. You've probably seen highlights of like Shadowheart soloing a lot of undead encounters just with using the Githyanki Crush Mace. But like, even without that, like turn undead, the damage, the damage increases against the undead, all the radiant options, it really makes it that much better. I almost forgot to mention that, but I'm glad I did. Okay, back to Druid. So it's again, shapeshifting as a pure shapeshifter melee. It's not that good. The Druid really shines if you want an off tank. If you can figure out a way to give them an arbor proficiency, shapeshift, reset their health bar, and kind of abuse the shapeshifting in that way so they can get damage and stuff like that. I think House in early game in the party with the Goblin Camp, they might get a knockdown, a prone attack, but it's like, okay, you get that in other ways. I would rather just bring a Battlemaster Fighter, use Lae'zel in the early game that way to bring that type of CC to create advantage. But the Druid just doesn't do enough. Circle of Spores is not good enough early game, not even until level 6, until you start getting the summons. And even with that, like the symbiotic entity is just not, it's not good enough early game because the health, temporary health scaling is just too low, which really like deflates the class, and the other subclasses again, they just aren't good enough. The pure casters are weak, and Druid especially is weak because it really doesn't offer anything game changing or really like, oh, I get this in my party now. You really don't get anything from the Druid that you can't get from anything else. All right, now it's the Monk. You probably seen when I did my second build video, it was actually the Monk. This can be S tier, but I'm going to give it A tier because I really do think the Guts Barbarian early game is just in a class on its own. The best thing about Monk is that it's one of the first classes to get multiple attacks a turn, right? I think Way the Open Hand is incredible, right? The Monk does not really start scaling till you get items, but I still think it deserves A tier because getting Key back on short rest, it's a better CC machine in melee than fighter early, right? And you get the stuff earlier. Shadow Monk is also viable. Way of the Elements is okay if you want to get some elemental damage and you know, use some environmental effects with the elements. That's okay. But I really think Way of the Open Fist early game is a very, very good. You'll actually notice too, a lot of encounters actually a lot of hard people, a lot of hard bosses and enemies are actually weak to bludgeoning. I still remember one of my favorite highlights of Monk is fighting the Grimforge boss, and I actually just two-turned, killed him just with Monk, and I switched my my Guts, my Barbarian, gave him a crappy mace, and I literally just shit on him. Like, it was hilarious. And I'm like, oh, I'm just abusing bludgeoning damage. Like, it's great. Other encounters, too. I think a lot of the undead are weak to bludgeoning. In Act 2, what's his name? Balthazar fight. Like, all those undead, they're weak to bludgeoning. My Monk was just popping off. But Monk and melee, you get... and, like, this is the thing about the early game. The same thing I mentioned with the Barbarian. Any type of damage scaling... I got dust all over the place. Any type of AC scaling from stats in the early game is very, very good. You know, Barbarian, my builds, I like to go 16 con and 17 strength early. I do the same thing with these other classes, but for Monk, I'll do Dex. So, you know, you'll have 17, 16. You'll have 6 free AC from unarmored. Now you're pushing towards that medium heavy armored AC while having nice, consistent damage. It's just very, very good for these two classes, especially Monk, because they get AC from Wisdom too and Dex, right? So it's just very, very good that you get all this. Now, the Monk is not... it is a little bit frail in the early games, and this, once you get to the late game, this becomes not SS Giga Chat, this becomes absolute god tier, and I might just inflate this shit to make it the whole screen, because literally the Monk is the best class in the game late game. Nothing comes close, right? Maybe Sorc multicasting and Sorc points, sorcery slots expending, you know, meta casting does a lot of damage too, but I think Monk is just ridiculous. Like, I don't think anybody's really... I did not talk about this with Barbarian, but I think now that I'm talking about Monk, because obviously the thing's going to come up, Tavern Brawler. You have the option to abuse Tavern Brawler. You have the option to abuse, and I don't, you know, don't take abuse the wrong way. You know, this is a single-player role-playing game. You know, I just like abuse because it's not, you know, using elixirs or rely on stat increases does not really feel very, I don't want to say it doesn't feel like D&D to me, but it just feels like a little bit abusing, but if you're doing it, hell yeah, bro. Like, or girl, whatever. It's fucking awesome, right? I think that's incredible. You're using the inherent game you are using the inherent game mechanics to create advantages for you. And you know, now thinking about it, in D&D, hey, like, this is what it is, you know, like, you use every available option and resource to create, you know, the ultimate, you know, character, right? Now, talking about Tavern Brawler with Monk, like, obviously it is incredible in early game and it's very, very good. But in that situation, you might want to do a very, very early level dip to get medium or heavy armor proficiency. That way, when you go strength con, because you're not going to really talk about wisdom, because you're not on armor, you're not going to use the wisdom for AC, you're not going to use the dex for AC or damage, you're just going to be strength con. So with that said, you know, the damage is going to be incredible even early game, so that is an option if you want to do that. I just don't like doing that. It feels a little bit weird to me, and plus, like, everybody does it, so whatever. But now, Barbarian, real quick, now that I talked about Tavern Brawler, there is very, very early Act 1 with the Owlbear and another, I don't know where the other one, but you can get a spear that when you throw it, it does return you automatically. Now, I don't think Tavern Brawler throwing is too powerful early. I think it's good. But for Barbarian, Fighter, and these other classes, these other martials, I'll talk about it. I kind of saved it for when talking about Monk, because that's when everybody's like, oh shit, the Monk section, he's going to talk about Tavern Brawler. Alright, well, I'll talk about Tavern Brawler and throwing builds. Generally, they're all okay in the early game. I don't think they become too good till later, but I think even with Tavern Brawler Monk, it's still not as good as Barbarian. Just because Great Weapon Master is going to outscale it early, especially when you have free advantage with Barbarian, you know. It's just, this was by far, I think me going Barbarian early game just made the game, like, the early acts like an absolute breeze. Like, I think that's what really changed everything about my build. And that's that. All right, next up is the fighter. This is my personal favorite class in the game. Even with my bias, it does not belong in the SS Giga Chad tier. This might even be okay. This really hovers around being Poggies and being, it's okay. Like, XD, yeah? Nah. It's very, very hard. I kind of lean a little bit more towards the A tier, but I'm going to put a B tier because really, again, it's like, I don't think it's as strong as Monk early, but what you have is an off tank or a main tank if you really wanted to. You can also just make it primarily range. You have an incredible amount of utility. Champion subclass on fighter is not good early, right? The increased crit range just doesn't really matter in the early game where you're not able to really take advantage of Great Weapon Master and other benefits because you really have to rely on other outside factors to create an advantage. Sometimes on turn 1, you don't have the time to create an advantage with your other classes and stuff like that. It's not the easiest thing in the world to do. Real quick, talking about that. You might think that compared to the Barbarian, at least you don't have to use your first bonus action to rage. I don't think that's too much of a detriment in the early game. The early game turn is going to be a little bit longer because your damage output isn't good enough. You're going to have a longer and more extended fights in the early game. So I don't think the whole, oh, well, you lose a bonus action, you lose a turn, right? It's not comparable in the early game, right? In the late game, fighter absolutely eclipses Barbarian, but that's way later at level 11. So you have all the proficiencies, all the weapons. You can do whatever you want, range, melee. You get heavy armor. You get a lot of good stuff. The only viable really early game spec for fighter is Battle Master early. I don't think champion's good enough to increase crit range. You'll go from with advantage up to just under 20%, about 19.27 crit chance with fighter in the early game. It doesn't matter. Once you get to level 4, you're not going to be able to consistently take advantage. You're not going to be able to consistently take advantage of the increased crit range, and you're not going to be able to actually get advantage on your Great Weapon Master attacks on your own. It just takes too much with the party, and you got too many things to other do. It's just better to just go Barbarian and get the free advantage. Even though enemies get advantage on you, it's still absolutely worth it. But Battle Master, what it does do, it does complement your other classes, right? So if you wanted to go your MC Monk and you wanted to bring a fighter, that's probably a better option instead of the pure damage output, just because you'll get more CC potential, more tanking, feigning attack, support attacks. The superiority die are very good, plus that flat damage is very good too. If there was a way to consistently generate advantage for the fighter without being detrimental to the rest of the party. Now, if you had your fighter as the MC early game and you want to roleplay that and you want to absolutely use every resource you have to make sure your fighter will have advantage on their attack turns when they hit level 4, level 5 with Great Weapon Master, okay, but by default, it still is not good as Barbarian. Now, the only other thing really is that this is an early game class tier list, guys. It does benefit the fighter that they do get the one class that's going to get 2 feats very early by level 6. So fighter, I think, shines the most as a frontline melee tank. I'll go back to the heavy armor master feat. It is extremely good early game. I think Eldritch Knight sucks early game until you hit level 5. Once you hit level 5 and you get extra attack, now the fighter as a whole is very good. Same thing with all the other marshals. They're the strongest early game classes just due to that. But Eldritch Knight, once you do hit level 6 and you're able to get 2 feats, one heavy armor master, maybe an ASI, maybe Great Weapon Master, able to deal with it. I had a guy in the comments in one video pretty much say even with like 40 or 50% hit chance, GWM, DPR, the damage per round, still outweighed the negative effect of your hit chance. I don't know if that's true or not. I have not done the math myself, but maybe that guy really knew what the fuck he was talking about. I don't know, but I'll leave that there. But again, probably Battle Master is the best subclass. Once you level 6 and you're able to get 2 feats, Eldritch Knight becomes a little bit more viable. That way you do get a little bit more spell slots. You be the ultimate tank with Heavy Armor Master and Blur combination. That's very good, but that's pretty much that. So next up is the Paladin. This is very close. You know what? I'm actually going to have to do it because this is just, I mean, if it wasn't for the undead abundancy in the early game, this would probably be high A, borderline S, but with that, it gets pushed up to SS Giga Chad tier. It is overall probably one of the best classes in the game. It is just too damn good. You have by far the highest damage potential early game with Smite Abuse. even with low levels, because you only need 2 levels with Paladin, right? So if you were to go, and even just the Paladin spell slots, you go pure Paladin from level 5 to 8 in the early game, because this really is like a level 8 and below tier list. It's still amazing. All you got to do is use, I think, 2 tadpoles for the automatic crit. And even though that's once per long rest, that is still incredible because, again, back to talking about the Bard, why it's not too good with the short rest, because you just get an abundancy of long rests and short rests. Resources are not hard to come by to use a lot of long rests. You're going to take a lot of long rests through the plot points early game and get those camp events. But, you know, the thematics, the role-playing potential, the lore, the damage output, heavy armor, great weapon master, auto hits, the auto crits, like it is just so damn good. And obviously Smite's doing hundreds of damage in the early game. It's like nothing compares to that, right? I was saying Barbarian's in a tier of its own, and on consistent damage output, it is in a tier of its own. If you do not value huge damage spikes during long rest, once per long rest, you can put this in A tier. But a lot of people will probably, oh god, no, the Oathbreaker, my Paladin, it's my favorite class ever. Like, how can you do that? I do think it does deserve S, but this is low S Giga Chad. I would put this like S minus. I don't know if you can add another tier to tier maker, but whatever. I don't mess with this too much. But anyway, Barbarian is in the first spot because it's better. Let me fix this actually. Because leftmost is actually going to be the highest. So it's Barbarian and then Paladin. But again, Paladin, you have the offhand supports. The channel divinities per long rest are good in a lot of situations because you're going to be able to get a lot of them. Yeah, a lot does not have to be said. You know, it's, you know, there's just too many good things with the Paladin. It's one of my favorite classes. Not the favorite for me, but, you know, Oathbreaker, the Death Knights, my fantasy love. That's my fantasy build right there. I'm a big fan of it. Trying to think if I'm forgetting anything. Not really. Like, it's very simple with Paladin. Smite abuse, utility, off healing, good summon divinities, you know, good main character with charisma. Like, yeah, it's just a lot of good stuff, guys. A lot of good stuff. Now, I actually think their secondary scaling is wisdom, but most people that go Paladin will dip Warlock for their charisma. And if they want to go Pact of the Blade, then that'll be that, but I'll talk about that a little bit later, right? And again, this whole tier list is the whole of the class. You're not going to do a lot of multi-classing early game. Early game, it's 1 to 8. Like, you will barely do multi-classing, so that's a thought to keep in mind, right? Next up, it's going to be the Ranger. And this might shock people, but this is actually in high A tier. It's not the best out of the A. It's definitely on the lower tier of A, upper B. And you might be thinking, what? Moses, Ranger's better than Fighter? Yeah. Beastmaster Ranger is incredible early game. Any number, any advantage you can make with numbers is very, very huge. That's one more target that you're adding to the party that's able to tank, deal damage, CC, control the battlefield. It's just so damn good. And Beastmaster Ranger by itself really brings it up to the A tier. You can be a melee dual wielder. You can be a range. I think range is better. You scale from Hunter's Mark. You get the extra attack at 5. You're a martial class. You get good spell supports. Again, Hunter's Mark is incredible because your pet benefits, you benefit, and all sources of flat damage are so damn good in the early game because now you're really just like, you know, a lot of the characters don't have a lot of health. With that said, talking about Ranger, Gloomstalker is also very good. I'm not going to talk about Hunter too much because it's just but you'll notice a lot about Gloomstalker is that free action on that first turn completely changes matchups. It completely changes a lot of fights because now you're, you know, when you hit level 5, you're doing 3 attacks level that first turn, right? And if you're the range Gloomstalker, now you're like, oh, now I'm going to pop off, right? But Gloomstalker is maybe high B, but in combination with Beastmaster, it's just too good. You know, once you hit 5, you get extra attack, and your pet gets the scaling. It's just, it really is incredible. You can even make arguments like, but this is the one class where like, oh, you know what, this might even be high A, because now I can bring like 2 Rangers if you want to RP that way, and have like, now you're just stacking the summons, the pets, and it's just, it's so damn good. A lot does not have to be said about this, but again, if you do want to go Gloomstalker Assassin, or if you want to follow my Loreful Shadowheart build and go Cleric Gloomstalker early game, just rush Ranger Gloomstalker and have like a two-hander or glaive or spear and shield with Shadowheart, you know, do a Cleric dip so you have some access to some support spells. I think in the early game that works. But again, it's very deserving of this low A tier. I think it's an excellent class in the early game. The Beast and the Beastmaster and their pets really shine early on in the game. Alright, this is going to be the last class I talk about before I take a real life break, but you're not going to notice that in the video. This actually might even be low B, but I'll just give it C. Rogue is just not that good, right? Sneak attack is very, very good. Now, this is very, very hard to rank because I'll tell you personally, I had a Starion during my whole Goblin camp in my first Tactician playthrough, and he absolutely dominated like fights just by being like not even just having a weight bow archer and abusing sneak attack, right, and hide. Now, you can go, oh, this is the SSS Giga Chat tier if you want to abuse stealth mechanics. I think they talked about it in patch 1 fixing it, or maybe it was patch 2. But let's say we're not going to abuse stealth and resets and stuff like that. I still think this is very, very low B, maybe even solid B, but I'll just put C just because you don't get the extra attack. You're completely relying on sneak attack, which is only an extra hit die early in the game. It scales as you level, but does not scale too much compared to an extra attack. And the problem is that you do get sharpshooter, but again, it's not the easiest thing if you're going to be sharpshooter feat with ranged sneak attacks to create advantage in that way. It's easier for rogues to get the melee sneak attack when you just have another party member next to the enemy. But then again, now they're not supposed to be on the front line like that, so it's very, very hard. I do think they're a good class. The only one I don't think I would ever use early game is Druid. Rogue is 100% viable early in the game, even as an MC. It's an excellent MC, skill monkey, a lot of proficiencies. You know, most of the interactions you do are going to be lockpick, store, traps, stuff like that, especially in the early game. So it's a very, very good face character, right? Like that MC, the environmental world character, like a star, and it's very, 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 very good to lead. Good perception. But again, in my experience, when I raided the Goblin camp, not raided, but kill all the goblins, my rogue, Astarion, popped off. Like, he was incredible. This was before any of the patches, so like I wasn't abusing stuff, but I did notice a lot of times like I'd get an opener and then nobody would react and I would just attack again. So I would literally one-shot somebody with sneak attack and a bow, you know, because they have low health and stuff like that, and then I would do this and I'm like, oh, okay, rogue's pretty good. But, you know, it doesn't really bring too much. Assassin's good early. Thief is good early. Now, if I was not going to talk about these classes holistically, actually, Thief Monk would be S tier once you reach level 8. Once Monk gets extra attack and Way of the Open Fist, and then you go Rogue for 3 Thief to get the extra bonus action. That combination becomes S tier, but I might do a separate class tier list for multi-class combinations. If you do want me to do that, just let me know in the comments, and I'll do that too. But again, Rose, it's a pretty solid C. You can go B tier if you want. Again, take everything with a grain of salt because at the end of the day, the point is to beat Tactician unless you're playing a modded campaign, and you can literally go for Druids if you wanted to. Like, Tactician's not hard. It is a little bit difficult in the early game, but really it's once you get enough experience to offset the encounters, you have an idea about how to use the environment. It's very, very easy to beat Tactician in the early game. But yeah, that's pretty much it for now. That is the Rogue. Not a lot needs to be said. Again, good skill monkey, sneak attack's good early, better range than melee. But yeah, that's the Rogue. Alright, so next up we have the Sorc. This one's hard. Again, I did talk about how all the casters I am going to rank relatively on the weaker side just because they don't have enough spell slots to really justify the calls except for one class. And you do get the long rest a lot, but still it's an inconvenience to have 1, 2, 3 fights and then you have the long rest as a sorcerer or wizard. It's very, very difficult. Now, you could even justify putting this in the worst tier. I don't think it's too viable early in the game. The cantrips just do not compare damage-wise to just regular attacks. And then once you get to level 5 with Marshall getting extra attack, Sorcerer does not get damage scaling really until level 6. So it's difficult. I actually don't know when Wizard gets it, but long story short, I think Sorcerer is a little bit better than Wizard. They offer more damage potential. Storm especially is good, especially when you're able to get Cold Lightning at level 5. Because then what happens is you cast it once, and if you maintain concentration, you don't have to expend spell slots. So at that case, it does get a little bit better. And because this is level 8 and lower, a low tier class ranking, a low level class ranking tier maker, I think it's okay to put Sorcerer as B. It's still a little bit on the weaker side. Definitely, I would actually take Bard over Sorc. If you need pure damage, I would much rather go Bard, Cleric, and use them as your spellcasting besides the Marshals, obviously. But Sorcerer and Wizard, they don't really pop off. They don't, like, pop off really until later in the game. Now, With that said, it's very similar to Wizard. Wizard, you have, you know, conjuration schools. I would say that if you really think about it, if you don't mind the summoner playstyle, at level 6, Wizard gets better summons. At level 5, they get animate. This is a big deal because in the early game, you know, Act 2, they're going to be good. The issue is that you deal with a lot of undead. A lot of the damage that the summons do might get resisted. I think it inherently lowers the value of the wizard. The scroll learning is very good, but the issue is that you're kind of choked on gold resources early in the game. So it's difficult to really farm gold early in the game, at least in my opinion. Maybe if you really cheese it and send every single piece of equipment to camp, travel back and forth, and generate gold that way to learn some scrolls as a wizard, you can do that. But, you know, I think objectively, Wizard is probably worse than Sorcerer. The one thing that Wizard does do is give you an incredible access to a wide array of spells. Now, with that said, you do get all the CC potential of the Wizard. You get the scrolls. You get a lot of good stuff. I think Wizard really shines. It's one of the few classes that is a good early game dip. Like, it's just a straight up one level dip of Wizard. Like a Sorc, once you get level 6, you would do a one level dip because you get the Sorc scaling for your modifier. I think at some point in early, it might be Act 2 or Act 3, but you do get a robe or something that additionally adds your charisma modifier to damaging attacks. Not attacks, but spells, cantrips, stuff like that. But, you know, I think objectively Wizard is one of the worst early game classes, just like most of the casters are. I would even go as far to say Wizard is weaker than Rogue. I would rather have a physical damage dealing ranged Rogue, an assassin, than a pure Wizard, because we are talking about the wholeality, like the wholeness of the classes, right, as pure. Now we have Warlock. This is difficult to rank because this is generally a S, like Paladin Warlock. Paladin Warlock are probably in a full class tier or S tier. Monk is godlike. Nothing competes with Monk in my opinion. And then I would put Fighter low S tier below the Paladin Warlock later in the game. But the thing about Warlock early in the game, and I do it a little bit lower, you know, Warlock Paladin early levels are interchangeable. Warlock is incredible. Actually, for this reason, I would put Warlock ahead of Paladin. The duality of the Warlock getting to level 5, you get extra attack. Beautiful. You get charisma scaling on your Eldritch Blast. You get Darkness Devil Sight combo. You get incredibly good spells. Hunger of Hadar. Hellish Rebuke is incredibly good early in the game. And to top it all off, all these awesome things about Warlock, the best thing, spell slots on short rest. And again, you know, short resting is super easy. If you have double melee, double martial, lock, bard, double martial, warlock, and the cleric, you're going to have a very comfortable time getting through Acts 1 and 2. Warlock is incredible. Will is incredible. I used them almost through the entirety of Act 1, and I used them on and off in Act 2, especially rotating with Karlach and some other characters as I wanted to really get the lore aspects of the game and, like, you know, get the characters, have the interactions with the NPCs and the, you know, the quest givers and stuff like that when appropriate. But Warlock, again, another huge thing is that once you get Pact of the Blade, I think it is Pact of the Blade, but if you do go Pact of the Blade, now you have one modifier. You go Con, you go Charisma. You can use Dex or Strength as that third stat if you want to get like a little bit jump distance. If you want a little bit more initiative, you can do that. But now you not only are scaling, I got dust. I just moved, guys. I got dust everywhere. I'm sorry. But not only do you get the Charisma scaling, so you have the option to be a ranged machine gun or Eldritch Blast as that scales with levels. And then, you know, you can be in melee. And once you get 5, just like the Marshals, you can get 2 attacks if you want to. So the versatility of the Warlock, Hunger of Hadar, is so goddamn cool. And the lore of the Warlock, absolutely amazing. I love it. It really fits into the Death Knight feel. If you're into that, again, you go refer to my Death Knight video. I hope you guys enjoy that. But like Warlock, Paladin are so good. You could even argue that Warlock belongs in its own tier. You can do that, but I think Barbarian just getting 3 attacks early, flat damage reduction, flat damage increase, great weapon master. And like Warlock can get that too, but like just being the pure melee god, the guts, you know, Black Swordsman arc, just the absolutely unhinged rage monster. Hey man, nothing comes close to Barbarian up until really like level 10, 11 when you start getting into the multi-classing and late game. But that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Hopefully this tier list is a little bit more useful to you for an early game perspective, Acts 1 to 2. This tier list does not apply to late game builds. It would be completely different. Just want to put that out there. And again, last thing, Besides, like, comment, and subscribe. Especially comment, tell me what your thoughts are on the early game classes, on the wholeality, disregarding multi-classes, what you think. Let me know. Keep subscribing. My channel's growing. I'm really liking it, and I'm having so much fun creating content for you guys. And then, again, the last thing. Do not take this as, oh shit, I can't play a druid. Oh no, Moses said rogue sucks. I can't use Gale as a wizard. It's not true at all. Tactician it is a little bit difficult in the early game, but you get, with a good amount of knowledge, practice, rehearsing the fights, having an idea of how the game progresses, you can make any combination of these classes work. I'm just giving you my personal rankings and what I think is like the absolute most insane pure classes and subclasses in the game. Again, Moses with Negron Tech. I hope you guys enjoyed. Have a good one.